Tucker, thanks so much for spending time with us today.
Of course.
As I've gotten to know you and now work with you and your company on my book, etc., really fascinating ideas and orientations you have towards entrepreneurism and wealth development, etc. So let's just start with your story. Like,
right.
What was your upbringing like, and what was your path to get to where you are?
My parents were divorced when I was very little, like a year and a half. I grew up mostly with my mom in Kentucky, which is an awful place to grow up, but it's kind of what I had.
No offense to the people in Kentucky.
Give offense, I don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm still a Wildcat fan. Like,
yeah.
I still root for the Kentucky's team, but it's just not a great place to grow up. And then my dad actually was an entrepreneur. He had, still has, several restaurants in South Florida. So it's kind of funny. Like, my mom always worked, kind of normal person, worked for other people. And she wasn't really very good at life, so she was fired a lot from jobs. And then my dad, so I kind of saw firsthand the difference between working for other people and having your own thing. My dad had his own companies, and he, had, real nice house and cars and money and all that kind of stuff. But my mom and I always struggled because, she didn't do her own thing, So that was growing up, and then for undergrad, I went to college, and then I was
you did very well academically.
Yeah. So I went to the University of Chicago for undergrad. I graduated in 3 years, summa from there, and then I was kind of a coward. And I say it like, I wish I could tell you some amazing story about how smart and brave I was as a teenager in 20s. I wasn't. I was an idiot. And so, of course, when you go to a big high-level school, you generally think that at least when I was going to college, your path, either you're a management consultant or you're an iBanker or you're a lawyer, right?
And you had those paths available to you as far as the investment banking and so on.
Yeah.
Because you, economics you studied in school?
Yeah, I was a econ and law letters double major at University of Chicago. So I ended up dropping econ so I could graduate in 3 years, but that was still kind of my path. And so, I interviewed Morgan Stanley and Goldman. I got offers at the iBanks, and then, McKinsey and KPMG. I got offers at consulting firms. And I ended up turning those down because I had, friends who were older who worked there, and they're like, no, this is terrible. It's a sweatshop. You're going to work 100 hours, Even the ones who liked it were like, oh man, your life looks miserable. You're in the office 16 hours a day, and then you go do blow and go hang out with hookers. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I'm talking about the iBankers.
Right.
All of my friends that were iBankers were just miserable, awful people. And so I decided not to do that. But instead of realizing, maybe I need to get out of the system and go build my own thing, I was way too arrogant and stupid to do that. So I thought, I'll just go to law school, right? And so I ended up getting an academic scholarship to Duke, which was I think still is, but at the time was a top 10 law school. And so I went there, and law school was easy and stupid and worthless, at least for me. I mean, it was ridiculous. I realized after the first semester I didn't have to go to class at all. So all I had to do was basically read the textbook a week before exams, and then I would do very well. And so it's funny, I ended up spending the second semester of my third year in Cancun. I just was like, all right, I'm going to go to Cancun because I don't need to be in class. So from February through April, I just went and got a job, with one of those all these groups that kind of take college kids down there.
Right.
I just got a job as on-site staff, and so it was I got paid to drink and party and hang out with girls. It was great.
And what would you do? Fly back for exams? Or?
Yeah, I flew back for exams. And there's only one exam at the end. Oh. What's funny is they actually changed the rules of law school because of me. No, seriously, they did. I graduated in 2001. I think in 2005 or 2006. After my books came out, I kind of became well known. I talked about my books, how law school's a joke and whatever. They put in what's known as the Tucker Max rule, that law schools, to be ABA accredited, have to actually take attendance. Before that, they didn't care if you went to class or not. They never took attendance. It didn't matter because they assumed if you were at a law school that you were going to go anyway and you were already whatever. And I proved that this school itself is a complete joke and you don't have to go at all. And then I talked about it to everybody. Everyone knew this, but no one had really admitted it. And so I wrote about it and whatever. And so they got all fussy and upset.
They called it the Tucker Max rule.
I mean, I know someone who was on the ABA sort of committee, and they were like, yeah, we didn't officially call it that, but they're like, we passed that because of you. because you wrote all that stuff and made us look stupid. Well, maybe your rules are stupid, and maybe your school is dumb. Anyway, so I became a lawyer, and then I got fired 3 weeks into my first job as a lawyer, and it was justified. I was a reckless, unguided missile, and that story is in my first book. And so I got fired, and then I went to work for my dad, and it took longer, but then he fired me from the family business. So I literally, in a 6-month period or a year period, got fired from the 2 things that I trained for. And like I got fired, like being a summer associate, it's impossible to get fired. I got fired. Who gets fired then from working for their family business? I got fired. So after that, I was not doing so well. When I was, in Florida working for my dad, I hated it. I hated South Florida. It's just like a cultural wasteland, right? And so I just could not stand any aspect of it. And I would write emails to my friends about all the dumb things I was doing because I was depressed and hated my life. And they thought like these emails were hilarious. And so after my dad fired me, they're like, look, man, you're not good at the things that you train for, like law and business, but these emails you've written are like the funniest thing we've ever read. You should do that. And I'm like, what am I, some I'm gonna go be a writer? Get out of here. Like, I'm a man. Like, I'm never gonna do, right? In case you remember, I'm 25. I'm an idiot, right? Yeah. And so that's an idiot narrative. That's when, what you think when you're an idiot. I ignored them for a while. And then like they had started forwarding my emails to like other people outside of
the circle.
Yeah, our social circle. And so I started getting my emails forwarded back to me from like random people that like, I went to high school with or college, right? And they're like, hey man, have you seen this email? It's really funny. It sounds like you. And I'm like, Jack, scroll to the bottom. Remember email forwards, right? Like scroll to the bottom, look at that. I wrote that. This is in 2001, 2002. Right. This is even before MySpace or Facebook. Right. And so that's when I realized, okay, maybe my friends were right. That's when I started to get unstupid and started to like look at evidence of the world and base my reality on that instead of what I thought it should be. And so then I applied, or I tried to get I took like the 5 funniest emails and I sent them to every publisher in New York. And I mean, every children's book publisher, cookbooks, I didn't care. Yeah. If you were a publisher, you got a submission, and agents too. 500 or 1,000 query letters. This is, obviously back when snail mail was still kind of like the way you did this in publishing. Right. And I'm not exaggerating when I say 90% of people ignored me. Mm-hmm. Probably 10% sent rejection. Yeah, I got about 100, maybe 50 to 100 rejection letters. Mm-hmm. Most of them were form letters, right? There were 3 or 4 people who actually took the time to write personalized rejection letters, saying things like, this is the worst thing I've ever read. You should never write again. You shouldn't even write an email. Maybe you should consider killing yourself. Like, it was, they were pretty brutal. Because I guess if you write a personalized rejection, it kind of hit a nerve in you, right? Yeah. But at that point, I had gotten so many of my emails forwarded back to me that I was like, you people whose job it is to know what books are going to sell are all idiots. This is actually a part where stupidity helped me. And arrogance helped me. And so I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about, so I'm gonna go do this myself. And but at the time, it was, again, this is 2002. Mm-hmm. So this is before even MySpace, right? Like the word blog didn't really exist at this point. So I learned how to program HTML, and I got a GeoCities site, and I put my stuff up on GeoCities, just the emails. Like I just put my writing up for free on the internet before this was a thing. And it blew up. And MTV came and filmed the segment on me about like online dating or something, because I wrote about like dating stories, a lot of it. And then like this girl that I dated sued me, and that became a huge First Amendment case. Wow. And then it kind of took off from there, and then publishers came back, and then I did my first book called I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell. It came out in 2006. It hit the New York Times bestseller list out of nowhere, like 0 reviews, 0 coverage, nothing. But because I had an online presence and I've been putting my stuff out for free, I had an email list and all that, I had, 60, 70,000 people on my list at the time. So I sold 5,000 copies the first week. Wow. And then 3,500 the second week. And so it spent 2 weeks on the list, and it did pretty well, which is like, now that's kind of the standard. But it was the first blog to bestseller. Wow. Ever. And then it kind of fell off a little, and then it just slowly picked up. And then in late 2007, it went back on the list, and it stayed on until 2012.
Wow.
Yeah, 5 straight years, never off the list. And then I did 2, and it eventually became a #1 bestseller. And then I did 2 more #1 bestsellers, Assholes Finished First and Hilarity Ensues. And then in 12, I just eventually, like, all my stories are about the dumb things you do when you're in your 20s, right? Drinking, partying, throw up on yourself. And I was especially dumb, so I had a lot of stories. But eventually, they kind of ran out, right? Yeah. And so I retired in 12 from writing that stuff. But I'd sold millions and millions of books, so I didn't have to work. I was doing pretty well. And I spent a few years, I kind of got into angel investing because I had a lot of friends in tech. And like everyone in tech, a lot of really smart people who make great products, and they're all terrible marketers, the worst. And so they would like come to me and be like, "Oh, I've got this really cool app or whatever." I'm like, "Oh, that is cool." I'm like, and they're like, "But no one's using it." I'm like, "Well, how do you describe it?" And they would tell me, I'm like, "Oh, that's terrible. No, you should say this." And then they would like go do it, and then they would get thousands of downloads or whatever, and they'd come back to me like, "Oh, like, hey, I realized I had like a skill set." Because you work in entertainment. You only eat what you kill. You've got to be engaging. You've got to have it together. And so it's like once you make it entertainment, then you almost by default know how to market and tell stories.
Right.
And so I ended up realizing I had a lot of skills in those areas. And so I ended up both investing and advising a lot of tech companies and kind of helping a lot of them grow. And I did pretty well there. Then the big kind of thing that I'm working on now that this is my sort of next thing in life. In 2014, I went to an entrepreneur dinner, and this woman came up to me, and she had kind of a big company in fashion, and she's like, "Hey, like I know you've written books. I tried to write a book. It's too much of a pain in the butt. I have a family. I have this big company I have to run, but people have been asking me to write this book for a decade.
Right.
How do I get this book out of my head without having to sit down at a computer for a year and open a vein over the keyboard?" Like she's like, "I just can't. I don't have the time. I don't have the ability. Whatever." And I was like, "Are you asking me how to write a book without writing it?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "You can't do that. That's ridiculous, right?" And I'm like, being kind of the snobby elitist writer.
Right.
And so she stops me and she says, "Tucker, are you an entrepreneur?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course. This is an entrepreneur dinner." She's like, "I don't think so." I'm like, what are you talking about?" She's like, "Well, a real entrepreneur would help me solve my problem and not lecture me about hard work." And I was like,
"That's great."
Like, like Bafangul, but she was totally right. She was so right. It was one of those gut punches where like, then of course I became obsessed with what she was talking about because like I was wrong. And so I spent the next few months obsessed with how do I get a book out of her head without her having to become a writer.
Right.
And I mean, I'm dumb, so it took me a while to figure it out. But eventually I was like, oh, of course, people figured this out 2,000 years ago. Just use scribes. Like Socrates never wrote a word down. Plato did, right? Jesus never wrote a word down. The apostles did.
Right.
Buddha never wrote anything down. His disciples did. Malcolm X had Alex Haley. Marco Polo had his cellmate who was a scribe. Like, go down the list. Like, we have all these amazing, iconic works of literature in the Western canon because of scribes. So if Jesus can do it, why can't Melissa?
Right.
Which is like this woman. So I kind of wrote down everything you had to do to write a book, and I realized the content's extremely important, but it's really only about half of what you do. And so I called her up. I said, "All right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to call you and interview you for the content. You don't have to do anything else, but you got to know what you're talking about." Because I don't want to ghostwrite this. I'm not going to go learn about fashion or whatever. It's all got to come out of your head.
Now that's an important distinction because again, your ghostwriting is common, where basically you hire somebody, they write the book for you.
And then you put your name on it.
Right, and
totally different.
That's a very different thing.
Yeah, so I wasn't interested in doing that. She didn't want that either. She wanted her voice, her knowledge. She wanted her to basically get it out of her head and into a book so she could give to people because she's a really high-end consultant. And there were, at a minimum, she wanted to be able to help all the people that couldn't afford her, right? And so, so I was like, I'm just gonna, ask you a bunch of questions. We're gonna kind of go through this trial and error and see if it works. And she's like, okay, great. And it ended up working great. Like I got a fantastic book out of her. It was, all her ideas, her words, her voice. I didn't go learn anything about fashion or whatever. And then it did great. And this is how dumb I am. I was like, oh yeah, like she paid me like 10 grand. I was like, I don't care. Okay, great, thanks. That's awesome. For me, it was more about the solving the problem, right? I was like, oh, I figured out a cool new thing, whatever. And then someone calls me one day and they're like, hey, can you do for me what Melissa did? Or can you do for me what you did for Melissa? And I was like, who the hell are you? She's like, oh, sorry, like Melissa gave me your number and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what? No, I'm not gonna, what? No, like what? And they're like, well, I'll pay you, double what Melissa paid. I was like, okay, sure. And then like she recommended someone else. And then like I talked to someone about this and just kind of told them the story, just to prove how clever I was. And they tried to hire me. And then eventually my dumb ass realized when someone is trying to pay you for something you aren't even trying to sell,
right,
that's the definition of a business, right? And so I had a buddy of mine who would kind of help me, and I was like, all right, here, you do I kind of walked him through how to do it. He's a good writer. You walked him through how to do it, kind of built a process. He became the co-founder, and then I did a podcast about this that blew up, and we signed like $200,000 worth of clients in a month, and I was like, I guess this is a real company. Mm-hmm. Then once we really got into it, we realized, okay, this is a big deal. This is a massive demand. It stretches way beyond books. And so that was 4 years ago. Now the company is called Scribe. We have about 40 full-time employees, another 100 plus freelancers that we work with. We've done about 1,000 books, give or take, including yours in process now. And yeah, that's where I am.
Thanks so much for being here and watching that video. And can I ask you to please subscribe to our channel so you can find out when we're posting new content. You'll be alerted right away when we do. To share this with people you think might benefit from the information, and certainly it helps us if you like the video. So if you like what you just saw, go ahead and hit that like button. And again, thank you so much for being here with me right now.